If you want to fulfill your faith in Jesus, then you have to believe in him the way he taught you to believe in him. This episode will provide conclusive evidence from the Bible that proves Jesus isn't God and he never taught such a doctrine. The most rigorous methodology for understanding the true nature of Jesus isn't by reading a handful of verses and trying to make your own interpretations. The most reliable way of understanding Jesus is by following the understanding of his disciples, who knew him best and knew how to interpret his sayings correctly. You should follow the understanding and interpretations of the disciples because Jesus personally trained them for years so that they would be qualified in spreading his message. The disciples spoke the actual language of Jesus, so they understood his idioms and figures of speech correctly. The disciples not only had the sayings of Jesus from the Gospels, which survive in the written record today, but they also had thousands of hours more of Jesus explaining, expounding, and clarifying the gospel. As the Gospel of John concludes, Jesus did many other things. If they were all written down, I suppose the whole world could not contain the books that would be written. We don't have all that knowledge today, but the disciples did. If you want to have faith in Jesus, you have to believe in him the way he taught. And the understanding of the disciples is the most reliable way of understanding the true nature of Jesus. Now that you know the methodology for understanding Jesus through his disciples, let's find out what they believed about him. The great teacher once asked his disciples, "Who do people say I am?" While they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others say you're one of the other prophets." Then he asked them, "But who do you say I am?" Peter replied, "You are the Messiah." But Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. Mark 8:27. From this passage, we learn that the masses of people who encountered Jesus believed he was a prophet on par with John the Baptizer or Elijah. However, Peter, his chief disciple, concluded that he wasn't only a prophet, but also the Messiah, who was an apocalyptic figure from the Jewish tradition who would assume political leadership and usher in a new era of righteousness, peace, and prosperity. Note that the disciples had absolutely no notion of Jesus being God. Next, we have a clear creedal statement from Martha, a beloved follower of Jesus. During their conversation, Jesus says, "Anyone who believes in me will live, even after dying. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this, Martha?" So if you believe in Jesus, you won't die. But believe in him as what? A man? An angel? God? What do you have to believe about Jesus? Fortunately, Martha gives the answer. She responds, "I have always believed you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who has come into the world from God." John 11:25-27. According to Martha, you have to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, Son of God, and he was sent by God. Martha doesn't believe he is God or one of three personalities of a Godhead. There is only one world religion which shares the Christological beliefs of Martha. Ironically, it isn't mainstream Christianity. It's Islam. Muslims believe that Jesus is the Messiah. They believe that he is the Son of God in the way that Jesus himself defined the term. According to the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus said, "Who is my mother? Who are my brothers?" And then he pointed to the disciples and said, "Look, these are my mother and my brothers. Anyone who does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and my sister and my mother." Matthew 12:49-50. This means that if you do the will of God, you're a brother of Jesus. If Jesus is the Son of God and you're his brother, then by logical necessity, you are a son of God like Jesus. Interestingly, the Arabic word Muslim means one who submits to God. Jesus was therefore saying, to be his brother or his sister or his mother, you have to be a Muslim. You have to be one who submits to God. Finally, Muslims believe that Jesus was sent by God and sent into the world with his spirit being miraculously transferred into his mother, Mary. May God be pleased with her. However, mainstream Christianity falls into error by throwing in an extra belief which Martha never stated, which is that Jesus is also God and one of three persons of a Godhead. Claiming such is an unfounded innovation to the beliefs of Martha. The next statement of Christological belief occurs after the alleged death and resurrection of Jesus. He appears to a couple of crestfallen disciples on the road to Emmaus. Jesus asks them, "What are you discussing so intently as you walk?" They stop short, sadness written across their faces. Then one of them, Cleopas, replied, "You must be the only person in Jerusalem who hasn't heard about all the things that have happened in the last few days." "What things?" Jesus asked. "The things that happened to Jesus, the man from Nazareth," they said. "He was a prophet who did powerful miracles, and he was a mighty teacher in the eyes of God and all the people. But our leading priests and other religious leaders handed him over to be condemned to death, and they crucified him. We had hoped he was the Messiah who would come to rescue Israel." These disciples believed that Jesus was a man, a prophet, a teacher, and the Messiah. They never believed he was God at all. What about doubting Thomas saying to Jesus, "My Lord and my God"? That's not a statement of belief. It's an exclamation of shock. If your bosom buddy walks into your house after being mangled by a puma, you'd exclaim, "Oh my God!" But you don't actually mean your buddy is your God. How do we know that that interpretation is correct? Well, 2 verses later, the author of the Gospel of John supports it by stating, "But these are written so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, Son of God, and that believing in him you will have life by the power of his name." So after the exclamation of Thomas, the author of the Gospel concludes with a clear creedal statement about the nature of Jesus. He is the Messiah and Son of God, not God himself. And by believing that, you will be successful. Perhaps Jesus only revealed his divinity after he completed his earthly ministry and ascended to heaven. Let's see what the disciples taught after Jesus left the world and charged his disciples with spreading his message. Peter, the chief disciple of Jesus, calls a crowd of people in Jerusalem and says, "Men of Israel, hear these words. Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested to you by God with mighty works and wonders and signs that God did through him in your midst, as you yourselves know." Acts 2:22. After everything Jesus taught him, Peter concluded that Jesus was a man, a prophet, and it was God who did the miracles through him. Peter absolutely doesn't believe that Jesus is God or part of a Godhead. In every instance where the disciples teach people about the nature of Jesus, they not once teach a single person that Jesus is God or part of a Trinity. So you're probably asking yourself, if the close disciples never taught people that Jesus is God, then where did such a notion come from? The truth is that the concept of the Trinity evolved over 300 years after Jesus. It was only one of many different views about the nature of Jesus. It just so happened that the Trinitarian view acquired political backing and used such power to suppress other competing views. Use the above methodology to help your Christian brothers and sisters rediscover the true nature of Jesus by believing in him the way his closest disciples believed in him, as a mighty man, messenger, and Messiah, not as a co-equal, co-eternal, co-substantial person of a triune Godhead.